Leora Maves thought she was falling in love. Joran Calix made her feel seen, understood, protected. But behind his calm eyes and gentle words hid something far more sinister. A predator with a plan. For 2 hours, in the quiet shadows of their bedroom, he unleashed a nightmare so calculated it would leave her broken, breathless, and barely alive. What happened between those 4 walls would lead detectives on a chilling manhunt and expose a darkness no one saw coming. Leora Maves had always been the kind of woman people described as quiet but kind. She lived in a small townhouse on the edge of Millgate, Illinois, a place where nothing ever seemed to happen. Her life was simple. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, rarely socialized, and mostly kept to herself. Her friends would occasionally invite her out, but more often than not, she'd decline politely. She enjoyed silence, routine, and control. But all of that changed the day she met Joran Calix. Joran was unlike anyone she had known. Tall, angular, with a soft voice and dark, unreadable eyes. He worked odd hours, claimed to do consulting work online, and never really explained more than that. To most people, that would have raised red flags. But to Leora, it felt like relief. Someone else who didn't like talking too much, someone private. Their first few dates were quiet evenings in takeout food, old horror movies, and conversations that never dug too deep. Within a few months, he began spending most of his nights at her place. At first, it felt exciting. He brought an eerie calm with him, but that calm slowly began to shift. Little things started changing. Leora stopped calling her sister. She stopped going to the gym. Her favorite houseplants died because she forgot to water them. When her best friend Mayela tried visiting unannounced, Leora didn't answer the door. Joran said it was just a phase, that she was learning to shed distractions. The bedroom became the center of their lives. Joran insisted that everything they needed was inside those 4 walls. He replaced the curtains with blackout drapes. He moved her desk upstairs so she wouldn't need to go down to her studio. He even installed locks on the inside of the bedroom. Door, just to feel safe, he had said. Leora, already emotionally subdued, didn't resist. She didn't realize how deeply she was being isolated. Neighbors had begun to take notice. The townhouse attached to hers belonged to an older couple, the Dunharts. They'd been hearing loud thumps late at night for the past 2 weeks. Once, they heard something that sounded like crying, muffled and desperate. But Joran had a way of smiling at people that made them second-guess their instincts. When the Dunharts asked if everything was okay, he calmly explained that Leora had been going through a hard time and was just dealing with anxiety. It was a believable lie, because by then, no one had seen Leora in days. Leora's transformation was not just emotional, but physical. She lost weight rapidly. Her eyes seemed duller, her walk slower. But she still answered emails now and then, giving the impression that she was fine. Joran had complete control of her life. He started managing her accounts, filtering her messages, and telling her when and what to eat. To outsiders, there was no screaming, no visible chaos, just silence, which can sometimes be far more terrifying. The turning point came on a Friday evening in late November. The weather outside was brutally cold, the streets icy, and the wind howled against the windows. Inside that room, something unthinkable happened. No one saw it. But at 11:42 p.m., the emergency services received a 911 call from a neighbor. They'd found a woman collapsed on their doorstep, barefoot and bruised, with blood staining her shirt. She had crawled out of the townhouse and used the last of her strength to knock before collapsing. When the paramedics arrived, they were met with a disturbing sight. Leora's face was swollen, her breathing labored, and her clothes torn. She was clutching something in her hand, refusing to let go even in her unconscious state. It wasn't until she was wheeled into Millgate General Hospital's trauma unit that the object was pried from her hand. A small USB flash drive, clutched, so tightly her palm had bled around it. No one knew what was on it yet. But one thing was immediately clear. Whatever had happened to her hadn't just started that night. It had been building for weeks, maybe months. And someone had made sure she wouldn't be able to tell anyone. Until now. At Millgate General Hospital, Leora Maves lay unconscious in a private trauma room, her body a patchwork of injuries. The medical team worked quickly, stabilizing her breathing and scanning her for internal damage. What they found shocked even the most experienced doctors. In addition to the broken ribs and fresh bruises, her body showed signs of older trauma. Healing. Fractures in her collarbone, faded marks around her wrists and ligature scars on her ankles. These weren't new. They told the story of someone who had been suffering for much longer than anyone realized. The USB flash drive taken from her hand was handed over to Detective Marek Daus, a 17-year veteran with a reputation for unraveling domestic abuse cases that others had overlooked. He had seen many disturbing things in his career, but something about this case unsettled him deeply. Leora's injuries weren't random or impulsive. They were calculated. There was a pattern, a system behind the abuse, which often pointed to a perpetrator who was in complete control. Marek ordered the drive to be examined immediately. Inside were dozens of audio files, each time-stamped and labeled with dates ranging back several months. The files were short at first, just ambient noises, the hum of a room, footsteps, the occasional door creaking. But the more recent files changed. They grew longer, more chaotic. Faint voices could be heard, one male, one female, often hard to decipher. But it was clear the woman was crying, sometimes begging. The man's voice remained low, almost eerily calm, barely above a whisper. The final recording on the drive was the longest, nearly 2 hours in length. The sound quality was poor, but Marek could make out terrifying details. The recording started with a door locking, then a dragging sound, something heavy across the floor, a chair scraping, then silence. Minutes later, the room filled with small thuds, intermittent crying, and something else. Metal scraping metal. It was the kind of audio that crawled under your skin. There were no screams, just small, strangled noises of someone who had no strength left to fight back. The audio ended with a loud crash and what sounded like someone gasping. It was clear this had been recorded the night Leora was found. Marek had the house locked down immediately. Officers entered the residence with a warrant, prepared for anything. What they found was not what anyone expected. The home appeared tidy, minimalist, with very little clutter. But it felt staged, sterile, almost like a set. In the bedroom, they found something strange. The mattress was stripped. The curtains were drawn tightly shut, even though it was midday. A corner of the room had a thick rug that seemed oddly out of place. When they peeled it back, they discovered dark stains on the wooden floor beneath. They found a hidden drawer in the closet. Inside were tools, not the kind for home repair, but for restraint. Zip ties, leather straps, and pieces of rope, carefully coiled and stored. There were also photos, printed and labeled with dates. Each photo showed Leora in the same room, sometimes on the floor, sometimes slumped against the bed. Her eyes were vacant in all of them, her posture limp. Some were blurry, others well-framed, like someone had taken time to capture them deliberately. The last photo had a timestamp from just 2 nights before. Her face was bruised, her hands limp in her lap. A hand, presumably Joran Calix's, was holding her jaw, forcing her to look at the camera. The image was chilling not just because of what it showed, but because it confirmed something darker. This wasn't impulsive violence. This was ritual. Detective Marek knew then that Leora had prepared for this moment. She had recorded the files. She had labeled them, she had hidden the drive, and when she saw a chance to escape, she took it, but not without making sure the truth came with her. Whatever Joran had done to her, she had been documenting it quietly, under the radar, waiting for the right moment to act. Marek realized he wasn't just looking at a case of abuse. He was staring into something far more methodical, far more dangerous. A psychological trap, built carefully over time and enforced through fear. The full contents of the final audio file were reviewed by Detective Marek Dowse and the forensic audio team in a secure room, away from the hospital, away from distractions. The 2-hour-long recording was the darkest piece of evidence they had come across in the case. It began with ambient silence and the familiar clicking sound of a lock being turned. Then came the dragging noise, heavy, deliberate, something being pulled across a wooden floor. Minutes passed before the next sound, a faint whimper, then a loud metallic clang. The forensic technician adjusted the levels to isolate the background noise. There it was, shuffling feet, the creak of a mattress, the subtle echo of chains. The sounds weren't chaotic. They followed a rhythm, almost like a process was being carried out. About 15 minutes into the recording, the audio captured a low groan of pain, followed by what could only be described as a quiet sobbing. Then something chilling, music, a soft, distorted tune playing in the background. It wasn't random. It was the same few notes on repeat Joran Calix had created, a routine, a ritual. The pattern of sounds made that clear. He would initiate the session by restraining Leora, then play music to mask the background noise, perhaps to calm himself or to detach from what he was doing. Every 20 minutes or so, the recording captured the sound of metal clinking, possibly tools being switched out or devices being adjusted. At the 1-hour mark, there was a loud crash and a gasp, followed by a long silence. No music, no movement, just breathing, heavy, panicked breathing. This moment, the investigators believed, was when Leora fought back. A bedside lamp found shattered at the scene matched the noise in the recording. She had managed to pull free of one wrist strap and, using what little energy she had, struck Joran with the lamp. Forensic analysis later revealed his blood on the broken base of that lamp. That brief moment of resistance was her only chance. Injured and disoriented, Leora made her way out of the room, through the house, and toward the neighbor's door. Back at the crime scene, officers conducted a deeper search of the property. In the corner of the bedroom, behind a false panel, they found a compartment built into the wall. Inside were more disturbing discoveries. 4 black notebooks, meticulously filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and tracking logs. Each notebook detailed routines, meal schedules, behavioral observations, and punishment records. Joran had been keeping tabs on Leora like she was part of an experiment. Even more horrifying were the references in those notebooks to a cleansing process, which he had written about extensively. It included times, tools, and phases of treatment. Under one entry, labeled only with a date, he had written, "Resistance was lower today. She's beginning to accept. A few more nights, and the transition will be complete." It read like the notes of someone who believed they were doing something necessary, not evil. As investigators continued examining the home, they discovered that the bedroom was not just a place for sleep. It was a controlled environment. Hidden beneath the carpet were speaker wires, and beneath the floorboards, a secondary locking mechanism designed to jam the door from within. Leora hadn't just been locked in from the outside. She had been sealed inside from every direction. The evidence collected, photos, notebooks, recordings, and forensic data, painted a detailed and terrifying picture. This wasn't a crime of passion or a single episode of violence. This was long-term imprisonment, psychological control, and planned torture. Leora's escape wasn't just lucky. It was a calculated risk taken after months of survival under impossible conditions. At the hospital, she remained unconscious for several more days. Her injuries were severe, but she was alive. Her medical chart listed multiple broken ribs, a fractured wrist, bruised lungs, and nerve damage. But she had made it out. And thanks to the flash drive she held tightly in her hand, the story she couldn't yet tell was already beginning to unfold. As Leora Maves lay in her hospital bed, still unconscious, the town of Millgate was already spiraling with whispers. The local news picked up the story quickly, reporting it with vague headlines that hinted at domestic abuse and possible captivity. But behind the scenes, Detective Merrick Dowse and his team were unraveling something far more disturbing. Joran Calix had disappeared. By the time officers reached the townhouse on the night Leora escaped, he was already gone. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of a hasty exit. He had planned it. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Joran walking calmly down a side street less than 20 minutes before the 911 call came in. He carried a duffel bag and didn't look back once. It was as if he had anticipated everything. Warrants were issued, alerts spread across state lines, and airports were flagged. But Joran had left no financial trail, no recent purchases, no ATM activity, no cell phone ping. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. His identity, it turned out, was even murkier. Joran Calix wasn't his real name. The ID he had shown to neighbors and landlords was a forged document. His fingerprints didn't match any national databases. He was a ghost with a plan. Back at the station, analysts went through the notebooks found in the hidden compartment. One entry caught everyone's attention. Dated 3 months earlier, it read, "In case she breaks early, execute Phase 2, relocation, new subject." That one sentence shifted the investigation into a race against time. If Joran was already preparing to do this again, they couldn't afford delays. Using partial DNA from the blood left at the scene and forensic evidence collected from the notebooks, Merrick contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Joran, whoever he really was, fit the profile of a highly organized and calculating offender. He had ritualized behavior, kept trophies, and maintained control through manipulation rather than chaos. These types of offenders often repeat their crimes, improving their techniques with each victim. But Leora wasn't the first. While cross-referencing missing person cases across several states, the team stumbled upon a disturbing pattern. 2 years earlier, in a different state, another woman had disappeared, Saren Halda, a freelance writer. She had gone missing after dating a man she met online. Her apartment was found locked, with signs she had been packing to leave. No struggle, no evidence of foul play. Her case went cold. Detectives compared notes from Saren's file and Leora's case. The similarities were chilling. Both women were self-employed, socially isolated, and had recently withdrawn from friends and family. Both had started dating a man described as reserved, tech-savvy, and oddly private. Facial reconstruction software used on the one existing. Photo of Saren's boyfriend confirmed it. It was Joran. Authorities now believed he had targeted women deliberately, choosing those who were quiet, independent, and less likely to be missed right away. He gained their trust slowly, inserted himself into their routines, then rewrote those routines entirely. By the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. Inside the hospital, Leora began to show signs of waking. Her eyelids fluttered, her fingers twitched, and heart monitors beeped faster. Doctors kept her sedated just enough to ease her pain, but the news was shared with Marek immediately. They hoped she would be able to speak soon. Her first-hand account would be the key to finally understanding the full depth of what Joran had done. Meanwhile, detectives issued a nationwide alert under the alias Joran Calix and distributed digitally aged versions of his face. They warned the public not to approach if he was seen. Behind the scenes, the FBI quietly elevated the case to high priority. This wasn't just a story of one woman's survival. It was the pursuit of a predator who had perfected his method, vanished without a trace, and might already be planning his next move. Leora Maves opened her eyes on the 9th day after her escape. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of machines tracking her recovery. Nurses moved with hushed efficiency, aware that she wasn't just any patient. She was the survivor of something monstrous. The trauma team prepared carefully, knowing her mind would need as much healing as her body. When Detective Merrick Dowse got the call that she was conscious, he drove to the hospital without delay. He didn't bring files or photos. He brought time. He needed her story. Not just the facts, but the experience. Leora couldn't speak for long stretches at first. Her voice was hoarse, her body still weak, but she insisted on trying. She described the beginning in simple, broken sentences. How Joran had been gentle at first, how he studied her routines, habits, and fears with quiet attention, how he made her feel safe, then slowly rewrote what normal meant. She didn't realize she was a prisoner until the locks changed, the windows sealed, and her phone disappeared. The worst part, she said, wasn't the pain. It was the silence. Joran rarely shouted or hit without warning. He preferred control, through cold logic, always explaining why she deserved what was happening. Over time, Leora said, she began to believe him. That's when she knew she had to fight for clarity before she lost her mind completely. She had hidden the flash drive weeks earlier, taping it inside the spine of an old book he never touched. When she realized she might not survive the last session, she moved it into her robe's inner pocket and held it tight. It was her insurance, her voice when she couldn't speak. That small act of foresight had brought her justice. Meanwhile, investigators continued searching for Joran. The breakthrough came when a gas station security camera in Colorado captured an image of a man with a similar build and gait purchasing snacks and fuel. He wore a baseball cap and had grown facial hair, but facial recognition confirmed it. It was Joran. He was using a new identity, Des Halrick. The truck he drove had stolen plates. He was still on the move. The FBI intensified their search, coordinating with local law enforcement in surrounding states. They believed Joran was heading toward remote areas, possibly preparing to disappear into wilderness regions where surveillance was minimal. Psychologists on the team warned that such offenders often escalate after their control is broken. Joran was likely enraged, and worse, he now knew Leora was alive. Detective Merrick took a calculated risk and recorded a public message through the media. It wasn't bait, but a warning. In a calm but firm tone, he addressed Joran directly, stating, "You failed to silence her. Her voice is louder now than ever, and we are coming." The clip was shared across national broadcasts and social media. The public response was overwhelming. Tips poured in from every corner of the country. A week later, in a remote cabin in northern Utah, Joran was found. He had taken another woman, a local school librarian, under the same pattern of manipulation. But this time, the cycle hadn't reached its full horror. The woman had grown suspicious and kept a secret burner phone. When officers arrived, they found her unharmed but terrified, locked inside a storage room. Joran was arrested without incident, though the calm on his face was unsettling. He said nothing. Not during transport, not during processing, not even during his arraignment. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Leora's recordings, the notebooks, the forensic traces, the survivor testimonies. His trial became a national sensation. Leora testified in court with a quiet strength that silenced the entire courtroom. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She told the truth, exactly as it was. And when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, she simply closed her eyes and let out a breath she had been holding for months. Joran Calix, or whatever his real name once was, would never be free again. Leora returned home not as a victim, but as the voice of hundreds who had been silenced. She started an outreach foundation for survivors of psychological abuse, teaching them how to recognize the signs and fight back. Her story didn't end in the bedroom or the emergency room. It became something far greater. It became a light for others, the kind that couldn't be hidden, even by darkness.